Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process and for authors to learn valuable tips on producing and marketing your audiobooks. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Hello, and thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to get into the weeds about what an audiobook actually is as a digital object and what that means in terms of distribution and how an audiobook is then delivered to the listening customer. So let's jump in. First of all, many people are not in that sort of behind-the-scenes world of audiobooks, may not realize that what an audiobook is not a single audio file. It is, in fact, a playlist of files. And that dramatically impacts how it is then distributed. So, first of all, coming back to what those files are, each of the files in an audiobook is an MP3 file. That's a compressed file. It is not a WAV file, which would be uncompressed. And it's compressed so that it is a smaller file overall. This is important because both for delivery of the file and making sure that we're not overloading our different devices or taking up too much storage space, whether we're talking about on the device that you're usually listening on, if you're downloading, or if you're storing the files for distribution before they're actually purchased. When you have WAV files that are not compressed, they take up considerably more digital space. And so they're much bigger files or heavier files, depending on how you want to think about those. And we're talking about MP3 files. And there are several other technical specifications that apply to that audio. I'm not going to get into that level of detail because I don't think that that is particularly helpful to the audiobook author. And it doesn't matter at all to the audiobook listener. The listener is mostly concerned with having a great listening experience, listening to high-quality audio. So, what the author needs to know is that the set of files, this playlist of files, does need to include certain specific elements. So the first file, and if you listen to audiobooks, you'll know this very well. This won't be any surprise, and it'll just maybe be redundant information for you. But the first file is always going to be your opening credits. That's where you're going to hear what the title of the audiobook is, who wrote it, and who is narrating it. That is the only information in that opening credits file. The end. Now, the start of every file, what we call the head, and the end of each file, what we call the tail, the head and the tail is what we call room tone, and that is silence, but not just any silence, not dead silence. It's the silence that the microphone picks up when it's in the recording booth, the recording space that the audiobook is going to be narrated in. So when let's say the narrator is in their booth and they're not talking and they're being very quiet, they're not breathing heavily into the mic or any of that. It's just, they might even not be in the booth. They've just hit record. Maybe they step out of the booth, they close the door, silence. But a particular kind of silence. It is their room tone. Now, room tones differ dramatically from one space to another, and that is all affected as well by your audio settings and everything. But in terms of the recorded silence, the silence itself is not going to be affected by the microphone that's in it. But when you record that silence, the sound of your room tone is then affected. This all plays into what those technical specifications are, so I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to point out that there is a requirement from each audiobook retailer that mandates how long that beginning silence, that head, and the ending silence, the tail, how long those can be. Typically, it is half a second to 1 second, has to be within that range for the head, and the tail needs to be typically somewhere between about 3 to 5 seconds. But there's some variance depending on the retailer themselves. Okay, I'm not going to go any deeper into the weeds on those technical specifications. But the other things you need to know in terms of that, the different components in this playlist. So we talked about the opening credits. Your closing credits are the very last file. Even if you have bonus material, interviews, whatever you have in there, sneak preview, all of that is going to go before this final file, which is your closing credits. And that's going to include the name of the audiobook, the title of the audiobook you just listened to, including the subtitle, as well as who wrote it and who narrated it. It will also include the copyright information, the year and ownership of the text copyright, and the year and ownership of the production copyright when the audiobook edition goes live. So those are the copyright dates that will also be included. Now, many times we'll have other closing credit information in there. We may have, for example, special thanks to certain people. You may have the name of the director, production manager, or project manager. You may have the name of the audio engineer, the studios that were used during the recording. There's all kinds of things that can also go in there. Music credits. So if there are any credits that need to be given, whether it's a Creative Commons license or any other kind of license, if the license requires that you state who wrote the music or whatever the terms, whatever those words are that are giving that proper credit according to the terms of the license, those would also be included in the closing credits. Now, anything between the opening credits file and the closing credits file is, going to vary depending on the audiobook, right? So you may have front matter, the very beginning information. You may have back matter after the body of the story. You may have bonus material that's going to fit somewhere between the end of the story and your closing credits. And the order of those files is really pretty much up to you and your audiobook producer. Your producer may have recommendations about that, and you can certainly ask them. These are questions that we address during the pre-production phase. So we make sure that everything is fully prepared, decided upon, and ready to go before we head into the recording process. Now, coming back to the question of what is an audiobook? As I explained, an audiobook is essentially a playlist of audio files, but there is other information that is packaged with those audio files that make up the audiobook in its entirety. One of those is the cover image. Another is the metadata. Now, the metadata, hopefully you know what metadata is, but basically it's things like your book description, your title, your subtitle, you as the name of the author or your pen name, the copyright information. There's a lot of text information that is a part of your metadata. And your cover image is also a part of that metadata. It's just a visual part. Another important piece of your metadata is your ISBN or ISBNs. In the audiobook realm, we will often use two ISBNs, one that's designated for retail and another that is designated for library. When you're entering the information about your ISBNs, when you're filling in your metadata on Bowker, which is where you purchase ISBNs for your different book formats, they will look absolutely identical. There's not really any differentiation. They look exactly the same as you're filling out the information. So it'll be a clone, but the digital distributors will use one for libraries and one for audiobook retailers. Let's take a short pause, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about what all of this means to your distribution and how it impacts your distribution and why that matters to you, and so that you have a better understanding of audiobooks, what they are, and how all of that affects the way that you manage your distribution. We'll be right back. Would you like to earn more from your audiobook sales? If you're an author with an audiobook, you may have noticed that royalties from Audible especially, and other platforms as well, are frankly kinda pathetically low, disappointingly low, and unfairly low considering what it cost you in effort and resources to create it. How is it the retailers are the ones making all the money off your work and investment? As someone who started in the audiobook industry in 1981, I've found it frustrating that authors keep getting shortchanged. The good news is that Pro Audio Voices just launched Amplify Audiobooks, a direct sale audiobook platform for authors that puts you back in the driver's seat. Earn 65% of the gross sales price that you set. Compare that to the percentage of the percentage that retailers give. Run promotions on schedule whenever you want. Create coupon codes. Build community with your customers, since you'll know who they are and how to contact them. Work with a caring, responsive, supportive team to help you succeed all along the way. Get help with marketing. Get paid weekly. We're helping audiobook authors who are frustrated by painfully low royalties and the barriers that prevent them from managing their own products and customers. Amplify Audiobooks is a direct sale platform that enables authors to earn much higher royalties and have way more control. We're disrupting the audiobook industry by putting authors first. Get started today at proaudiovoices.app or go to proaudiovoices.com and click on the Distribution Amplify link. Join the movement. And we're back. So the question about an audiobook as this package of information, how that then gets distributed. As I said, many authors expect that an audiobook is just one giant file. It's just one big audio file. Well, here's some reasons why that is not the case and why a playlist of audio files is a much more appropriate solution to the audiobook question. Okay? The audio files, and I talked in the beginning about how WAV files are much larger files than MP3s that we compress to make them smaller. So audio files, even as MP3s, are pretty large. Now, many audiobooks are several hours long. If you take an audiobook that is several hours long and try to put it all into one giant audio file, you're going to find that the file is so large that, first of all, bouncing that file or saving that file takes a long time. And then trying to send that file to anyone else can be a problem because it would be so huge. The person receiving that file is also likely going to have problems trying to figure out how to deal with this one large file because it is so big. Dealing with these really large, kind of unwieldy files is problematic for the many ways in which we use our devices on which we play these files. They can also be problematic in other ways, and some of those relate to storage, and some of them relate to just the ability to play a file easily. So if you start playing a huge file, you're typically going to have a much larger buffer experience. If you've ever been trying to watch a movie or something and you maybe don't have a great bandwidth, then you get that little circly timeout buffering situation. That would be really common and super annoying. So nobody really wants that. We want a good listening experience. So that's one reason why we really don't deal with these giant files. We do it chapter by chapter. And then another really important reason is in an audiobook, it's very helpful to be able to have the ability to jump forward to a track, jump back a track. Let's say you were listening to an audiobook and then something happened with the kids and you need to run outside and, you had just started the chapter, but now, maybe 15 minutes have gone by and what you really need to do is just start the chapter over again. If this was one giant file, you would have to be scrolling through a lot of audio trying to find your place. By having each chapter as a track unto its own, you get to jump forward and jump back, and it's much easier. Having tracks also is a real help when we want to do things like, for example, let's say that we have an audiobook with a meditation in it. And this is a guided meditation. Or maybe it's an experience where we want you to write something down and want you to take some time with it. Well, what if you're driving in the car and you can't do those things right now? It might make most sense for you to jump ahead to the next track. If instead you're forced to deal with one giant file, you're going to have to scroll your way forward to try to find the right spot to pick up where you want to pick up. So that's just a couple examples of why it's valuable and helpful to have these audiobook be a playlist rather than a single audio file. Now let's take it to that next level of distribution. I talked a little bit about that user experience of playing those files. Let's talk about the piece where how do you deliver the audiobook? You may note that really the best experience and by far the most common experience in listening to an audiobook is listening with an app, some kind of app. It might be a web app that you can listen on your computer. It might be a mobile app that you get from one of the app stores or one for your iPad. The reason why apps are so valuable as tools for listening to audiobooks is because they can take this collection, this sort of package of information, some of it being audio, some of it being your cover image, some of it being other information like your ISBN and your book description. And it can then deliver that in a way that is user-friendly. So when we go to the app and we can see the cover image and we can click on it to play it and the audio files play in order and we can see the book description. All of these things happen because the package of multiple parts is being delivered through this mechanism of the app. If you don't have an app and you try to sell your audiobook directly, you're going to have this collection, this playlist of files. You're going to have your metadata. You're going to have your cover image. How are you going to deliver that? If you just try to sell it without any kind of app experience, your listener is going to have a really hard time dealing with the files that you have sent. Now, if they're very tech savvy, they may not have any trouble with it. They could probably figure it out. But it's still not going to be a great experience because it's not a user-friendly experience. They won't be able to see the cover image except as, clicking on the file and opening it separately. If they want to play the files, they need to make sure they play them in order. Now, somebody who really knows what they're doing from a tech perspective, if your files are downloadable, they can bring them into a playlist and listen to them that way through like a music app. But most people really just want to make it easy. They just want to have an app. You see the picture of your book, you push the button to play, and you listen, right? They don't want to have to go through all the obstacle course, all of the challenges, the hurdles that you've put in front of them if you're trying to just sell them these files without any proper way to listen to them. And this is exactly why authors and rights holders have been at the mercy of audiobook retailers, because the distribution part, having the app player that is going to deliver this great listener experience, when we are relying on those retailers to give us the way to create that great listener experience, which is they have the app, right? All the big audiobook retailers have their own app. This is why, is because you need the app in order to have a good listening experience. And so this again is why then we end up sort of being at the mercy of these retailers. And this is where we're finally having some revolutionary, groundbreaking, game-changing things that are happening in the audiobook world. Amplify Audiobooks is one of the leaders in this game-changing platform building realm. It's a pretty small realm right now, but it's so important. One of the problems in the general retail audiobook industry has been that the authors basically, because they're at the mercy of these retailers, they have no control over the sales process, the royalties that they're earning. They don't have any control over the pricing, and they don't know who buys their audiobooks. So they're really left in the dark, and they're left with just like pennies on the dollar in terms of the royalties that come back to them. Amplify Audiobooks was designed knowing that this issue of having a very complex product requires an app of some kind. And it was through my determination and our team's sheer passion and care for our audiobook clients, our authors, recognizing what was happening in the industry for years, and also recognizing that in order to create an app that is going to create this great delivery experience, this listener experience, that it takes a considerable investment, financial investment, and, just a team that can pull that together. We really cared. We were determined to do it, and we did. So Amplify Audiobooks now is available and is a platform where your listeners can have that great experience of listening with an app, listening to this complex audiobook playlist product. And you now, with this platform, Amplify Audiobooks, you are also able to control your own pricing, to know who purchased your audiobook, and to earn way higher royalties because, in essence, you are selling directly from your own online store in the Amplify Audiobook Mall, if you will. It's like we've created a place, a platform, where you can have your own audiobook store and sell directly. And so that makes it possible for you to deliver your audiobook, earn way more from it, control the pricing, and know who purchased it. So I hope that this has been helpful. If you have questions about audiobooks, anything from literally what they are, and this was a question that I've addressed in this episode. This question was asked by one of our clients, and that's why I thought, well, let me answer it for everybody. But if you have questions about anything about the audiobook process, from pre-production to post-production to marketing, would love to hear what your questions are. You can always email us at AC, that's for Audiobook Connection, at proaudiovoices.com. let me know what your questions are. And then we also do host, I try to do it once a month, where we have a free audiobook Q&A session. Everyone's invited, and bring whatever questions you have about audiobooks. Thank you so much for being with me today. If this has been helpful to you at all, I would ask that you please share the link with someone you know that might benefit, or share the link to any of our podcast episodes that might benefit from this information. I devote a lot of energy and time, and it's a personal commitment that I make to help improve the audiobook world and our industry, and to help authors who have questions and are trying to figure out this complex audiobook realm. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you'll share this information with someone you know. Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.